This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast, part of the Seneca Network from SupChina. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I'm your host, Jared Turner, longtime resident of China, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series, and I guess you could say I'm a bit of an expert on the Dunning-Kruger effect. My co-host is John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of AllSet Learning, the Chinese grammar wiki, Sinosplice.com, and he once put a humidifier and a dehumidifier in a room together to find out which one would win. Last year, we did a survey of Chinese learners all over the globe, and we discovered 6 distinct types of Chinese learners. John and I are going to share these insights with you, so you'll know what type of learner you are. Interviews with Dillon Jaghory, who achieved advanced levels of Chinese without ever leaving the country. All this and more, let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner coming at you from Utah in the United States.
Hey everybody, my name is John Pasden, and I am in Shanghai, China, still under lockdown. How's it going?
All right, John, we have a review. Before we kick in today, do you want to hit us off with that?
Okay, this is from Portuguese with Christina in Portugal. And she says, "Are there people really learning Chinese? There are, and we are amazing. I found your podcast a few months ago, and I've been listening to it ever since. When I need a little motivational boost, a little bit of a 加油, I will put on one episode. You're my non-guilty way of procrastinating. I enjoy listening to you guys because I feel like I'm not crazy for wanting to learn this beautiful language. There actually are people out there that also enjoy learning Mandarin. My friends definitely don't understand my obsession. Anyway, I just hope everything is all right where you are and that you are safe. Greetings from Portugal. 非常感谢." Well, thanks, Christina. We can really feel your positivity all the way out here.
Very, very cool. Thanks, Christina. Tudo bem. All right, about a week ago, we had the National Chinese Language Conference here in the United States. And, John, we were there at that, virtually.
Yeah, I even popped in 2 nights, had some chats with other people in our virtual hangout spot.
It's been online the last couple of years due to the pandemic. And so just give a quick review of that. It's a great conference. It's primarily geared towards Chinese language teachers. And it's continually great to see how things develop in the Chinese pedagogy realm and how everyone's really focused and wants to really improve the quality of Chinese language education here in the United States. It is a U.S. conference, but we do sometimes have some participants from around the globe. But just also give that a shout out. But at that conference, I made a presentation, John.
Yeah, representing Mandarin Companion.
That's right. And this is what we're going to talk about today. If some of you may recall, last year we did a survey, and we were trying to get a better idea of our Chinese learners out there. And in that survey, we asked a whole lot of questions, and we did give away a bunch of prizes for that to the people who won. Well, when we got all the information from the survey in, one of the common things to do with this type of data is try to do something called a cluster analysis. So we do a statistical analysis and we try to find, hey, are there any statistically significant groups of people that are exhibiting, based on whatever variable that we put in there. And John, I spent weeks on this. I'm sure you recall that.
Oh, yeah.
We ended up hiring a data scientist to help us with this. And after looking through all these different variables, we only found one variable to be statistically significant within the data that we collected. And that was?
Eye color.
Yes, eye color. Wait, no, not eye color, John. It was learner motivation. So one of the questions we asked was, why did you start learning Chinese? And we allowed people to select up to 3 reasons why they had started learning Chinese. And it was fascinating to me. I have to be honest, John, I used to work in market research. I'm kind of get geek over this data stuff, as you know.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it was not gender, age, country, employment, education level, study habits, Chinese level, learning methods, or learning challenges. It was learning motivations.
So after we ran the statistical analysis on it, we used something called latent class analysis for all any of you statistical geeks out there. We found like these 6 distinct groups. And as we started examining these based on the learner motivation, it became very clear who these people were. So we're going to talk about that today and help you understand maybe what type of Chinese learner you are.
Okay, so Jared, I got to ask for our listeners, if If I'm a learner of Chinese and this podcast helps me figure out which of these 6 types of Chinese learner I am, how does that even help me?
I'm glad you asked, John. Well, I think as one thing, it's good to kind of have a little bit of a framework and understand, like, where are you? Like, what is really kind of fueling you or motivating you? Sometimes we may not ask that question of ourselves, but having a deeper understanding of that will help you to understand what might continue to keep you going and motivated as you are learning Chinese.
Right, and I think it can be easier to be given like these categories and then trying to align with one of them rather than just soul searching and like, what is my motivation? That can be really hard. And I think this is analogous to something that some of us have experienced as married people. There's this thing called the 5 love languages, and if you do the little test that comes with the book, or you can do it online too, you find out which is your love language, and it can really provide some interesting and deep insights to your relationship. Some things that you never realized before can come to the surface. Some things you never understood about your relationship start to make sense. So I don't know if it's going to be quite that huge of a breakthrough, through this podcast, but this type of, introspection can be super useful.
Yeah, maybe for some learners. But also on that level, even as you're talking, John, about, like the 5 love languages, which I absolutely love, haha. But this will help you also relate perhaps to other friends or people who are learning Chinese, because everyone's motivations sometimes are a little bit different. And before we also get into this, I want to also make it clear is that just because you might be one type of learner or you started out in perhaps one category doesn't mean you might not evolve into a different one. And that's something I have also witnessed, which is real common in doing all the interviews for this podcast, is that the motivations which got you started learning Chinese may not be the same motivation which is keeping you learning.
Yeah, and I've experienced changes in my own life too. We could maybe talk about that later.
Definitely. And also, last caveat on this is that you also may relate to like even up to 2 categories, which is common, even like the love languages, right, John? There's usually 2.
I'm a purist when it comes to love languages. But anyway, but these categories, actually, when you looked at the data, they do overlap like a little bit, right? They're not absolute.
Absolutely. You're right. I'm absolutely not absolutely.
All right, so let's get into it.
Yes, what you said, John. Okay. All right, so I'm going to review this real quick, the 6 types, and then we're going to break each one down. So the first one, language enthusiasts. Second, cultural connectors. Third, aspirational learners. Fourth, functional learners. 5, career-focused learners. And 6th, obligated learners. All right, so let's break this down. So the first one, language enthusiasts. So language enthusiasts, I got this little phrase that a language enthusiast might say. Learning Chinese and the accomplishment of achieving something difficult is its own reward. So language enthusiasts are primarily motivated by the intellectual curiosity, the enjoyment of learning a language. And there's also that challenge aspect that language enthusiasts enjoy. John, I think you kind of fall into this category.
I started that way for sure. I don't think I've stayed in that category. I remember there was a time when I specifically realized that I don't want to just keep collecting languages. I want to keep getting good at certain ones. But yeah, I was this way in my 20s, I guess.
There you go. And this category, obviously, does skew a little more in the people in their 20s. But yeah, so if you find that, hey, it's just, this is a little bit more of an academic based, I would almost imagine that, these people are just, hey, I like learning languages. And yeah, that's the bottom line behind language enthusiasts.
Without too much regard for how they're going to use them. Is that right?
Yes. In fact, we haven't delved into some of the depths of that, but I think there's on kind of a surface level. So, on this, we're talking, it's kind of on the high level here. There's obviously going to be a lot of other mix of motivations there, but this is the primary driver, is that, hey, I enjoy this. It's just interesting to me. It's intellectually stimulating, and the challenge aspect is I just enjoy that.
So the people that fall in that polyglot community and they just want to learn lots of languages, they would be this type, right?
That's what I think. And if they're not in this area, they're going to be in this next category.
All right.
And the next category is cultural connectors. I am intrigued by Chinese culture, history, and people, and I gain fulfillment by connecting through language. So cultural connectors, they want to use language as a tool to connect. Use Chinese to connect with something that they could only connect with using Chinese. And this could be a whole host of things. So it could be, music, martial arts, movies, history, just want to talk to the Chinese lady at the store, or maybe you have a romantic interest in someone who speaks Chinese, or you just want to be able to connect with that culture, or there could be coworkers, there could be a whole host of potential things that you want to connect with, but Chinese is that tool that you need to be able to connect.
And so would this include academic interests like history and literature and poetry and calligraphy, that kind of thing?
Definitely. It definitely can. And in fact, I will say that, in the research, the data show that these two groups here might have the biggest overlap is language enthusiasts and cultural connectors, because people who also want to connect culturally, they also do like the intellectual aspect of it, and they enjoy actually learning the languages. But that is, in essence, is kind of fueled by that desire to connect using Chinese.
So do you identify with this type at all, Jared?
You know what? Yes, I definitely do. And I originally started in a different category, which we're going to get to, but this is somewhere where I kind of fall now, that, I wanted to, I want to be able to connect and talk to people. I'm a very outgoing guy, and I like to be able to have conversations and, and relate to people, on their own level.
Yeah, I've felt like kind of maybe secondary motivations of this kind, but it hasn't really been my primary motivation.
But this is a big group, and I would say most people, it's almost like half of the people fall into this language enthusiast or cultural connector categories.
All right, so what's the third one?
All right, and the next group is aspirational learners. So here's something an aspirational learner might say. I admire people who can speak Chinese, and I want to be like them. Now, John, I've got to say that this category and group was the most surprising to me initially, but now as I think about it, it makes a little more sense. One of the questions we had put on this survey about, why did you start learning Chinese, is that, people got to select saying I was influenced or inspired by someone to learn. And it was surprising to me how many people selected that. And so this turned out to be a very large group. Roughly about 20% of learners fell into this category of like saying, hey, I was inspired by an experience or someone. And so I want to be like that. So people like in this category, it's like they are seeing someone that they're living the life that they want to live, or they see learning Chinese as being as like an important aspect of being the person that they want to be.
So this also sounds kind of like people not in China, maybe who've never been to China, but it's, they're aspiring to get there. Is that right?
That definitely could be part of it. I can relate to this, though. I did not necessarily start out like this, but this was a part, one of the things that was also fueling my desire to learn the language, because when I moved to China and I didn't speak Chinese, I saw these foreigners there who did speak Chinese, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. You learn this language. John, when I first met you, you're Chinese. I was like, wow, like I want to be like that. I want to be able to be a Chinese speaker too.
All right, I gotcha.
So this is I think it's something that, might not, if you really think about this and you've started learning Chinese, or this was something that was, fueling your desire to learn, think about that. Was there somebody out there who really did inspire you? And in fact, I'm even thinking about our interview podcast guests, and there was one person in specific that I definitely think that falls into this category, and that was Mark DuPont. He's in episode 73, which was improving your listening skills. And Mark, he just wanted to learn Chinese because one of the teachers at his school spoke Chinese. And it was evidently like an interest or a hobby of his, and he just thought that was really cool. That was really interesting. So he decided to learn Chinese and started learning just because he saw someone else who did, and I thought he wanted to be like that.
Makes sense. All right. So the next one is totally different from this one, right?
Yes, absolutely. So our next one is functional learners. So these people are learning largely for survival. So here's something that a functional learner might say. I hadn't planned on learning Chinese, but my life will be easier if I learn to speak and communicate with the people around me. So most of these people are living in Chinese-speaking countries like China or Taiwan. And so they were put in an environment, and all right, that's it. My life will be easier if I learn Chinese. I just need it to survive.
Right, and I've definitely met a lot of people like this in Shanghai and, around China. They've been my clients. They've been my friends. I've been pretty much in this role in the past. So, yeah, get it.
And I got to say, John, this is where I started, really. I mean, had I not moved to China, I don't think I would have learned Chinese. I hate saying it, but that's kind of the truth.
Yeah, I moved to China to ensure that I would learn Chinese.
There you go. So you forced yourself to be a functional learner at one point. But I will say that there came to a point of being able to function, and but that after that occurred, then I had to find other motivations to continue to learn. And so I think that's I initially started there as a functional learner, and also functional learners, they also are a bit motivated by that desire to connect with Chinese. Because, I mean, if you think about it, you move to China, you need to survive, but, if you also want to be able to talk to your neighbor or that person on the street or the vendor, the fruit vendor, things like that. And so I definitely, it kind of moved more from just functioning to also want to be able to connect with people.
So it naturally goes a little beyond survival and then can also naturally transition into something else, like a cultural connector or something like that.
Yes, definitely. And I think this is really important to note, because if you kind of we've gone through 4 of these different types of learners, these you can move. I think anyone listening here at this point can say, maybe I've actually started this area, but now I'm kind of like, moving in this category there. This is what's kind of motivated me. And it's real common. It's really common for your motivations to change and evolve over time.
All right, so what is the next one? We're on number 5 now.
Career-focused learners. So these people are learning Chinese for career reasons. All right, and here's something that this type of learner might say. By learning Chinese, I will have more career opportunities in the future. So, this is that opportunity where, you might have this idea about what career you want to do. And so you're like, and I need to learn Chinese to kind of get into that field or to be what I want to be, or perhaps learning Chinese will help you advance your career. And John, you actually have a lot of experience working with these type of people.
Yeah, I work with a lot of these types of people, and I kind of was one of these people. So I maybe started out as aspirational, became, functional, and then after I was functional, I was like, I really want to master Chinese. I want to do my master's in Chinese. I want my career to be focused on this. So, I was definitely career focused, not for opportunities in some industry, but just because I saw the language as the opportunity. And the people I work with at All Set Learning are mainly professionals in various industries, and they're working in China or with China, and being able to speak fluent Chinese, participate in meetings, lead presentations in Chinese really helps.
I will say something that was interesting to me about this segment as I delved into it is I found that this segment was a little bit larger in less developed countries. And because, John, I think it's interesting what you work with there in Shanghai. These are people who have already, they have a career, and so it could say, now I need to kind of learn Chinese or improve my Chinese to advance my career in China. But in a lot of other places that, being able to speak Chinese and be able to do business with China might be that real opportunity to have more opportunity, in an area where there may not be as much opportunity for you.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there are 2 stages here. Like, one is when you're a student and you're eyeing your career. So maybe you're poor or whatever, you're just starting out, but you have ambition. And then another is you're already established in your career, but you want that China angle, you want that China connection within your industry. So it could be either of those, is that right?
It definitely can be either. And I will say what was interesting is that this career focus of all the groups skewed the youngest. So I think what we have here in China is we have a bit of that second category, which you're talking about, is that they're a little bit more established because they're already there. They're doing business in China. But most of these career-focused learners are actually younger. They're ambitious, they're motivated, and they have their eye on China or a career that will have them doing something with China.
Yeah, actually, I've met a lot of people like that as interns. They're the ones that are willing to do all kinds of, Chinese-related internship work because they really want to improve their Chinese.
Fascinating. That makes sense.
Okay, so there's one more, right?
That's right. The last group, we call them obligated learners. All right, so here's a phrase an obligated learner might say. Learning Chinese is something I'm supposed to do, something I'm expected to do. So the key motivations behind these is there was a bit of a variety, and we kind of put these all together, is that, they want to connect to their Chinese heritage, family expectations required by school. So a lot of heritage learners are going to kind of fall into this category, And for anyone who's maybe not familiar with that term, heritage learner is someone who, whose parents are both or one parent's Chinese, and they might speak Chinese at home, and so their parents kind of, they've learned Chinese at home, but maybe not in an academic setting.
But also someone whose parents are ethnically Chinese but don't speak Chinese and they want to reconnect to their roots. They're also obligated learners?
Well, that's actually a good question. I think we'll put that one on pause there. But in general, is that these obligated learners, they're expected to do it. So it's usually not something that they're choosing. It's kind of more of it's an expectation and obligation that's been put upon them. So why these might be heritage learners, we also have a lot of kids that are in the dual language immersion programs in America or around the world, and and when they were young kids, their parents put them in it. So it's just they're kind of expected to. There's sometimes where schools, high schools or college might require them to take a language, and for whatever reason they chose Chinese, and they're just kind of expected to do it because that's a requirement.
Got it.
So obligated learners are actually the smallest group out of all these independent learners that we had surveyed. But I think it's really interesting because, a lot of, like I said, heritage learners do fall into this category. But, John, I've looked into this and actually interviewed a lot of heritage learners for our podcast, is that even if the heritage learners start out in this category, this isn't, they end up, if they ever really want to get a high level of Chinese, they usually find their own reason.
So they can transition to one of the other types.
Definitely. I think one of the most common ones I see is that they end up becoming these cultural connectors because they want to be able to connect with their roots. They want to be able to converse with their family. They want to go back to their home, the village where their parents came from, things like that, and be able to actually feel like they're connected to the culture.
But actually, we mentioned before that I've met a lot of these functional learners and career-focused learners here in China, and a lot of them are Chinese heritage. So I don't really know them as an obligated learner. I know them as one of these other learner types, but they might have started out that way.
Definitely. And this is a great example, too, of how we say how motivations change. You might start as an obligated learner, but you can move into a different category. So that's the 6 types of Chinese learners. And I'm just going to go through that list real quick again. So language enthusiasts, cultural connectors, aspirational learners, functional learners, career-focused learners, and obligated learners. And in general, about 70% of Chinese learners fall into these cultural connectors, language enthusiasts, and aspirational learners. I think what's really interesting to me about this is that, it makes a lot of sense with I've done all these interviews with the podcast because, I see really commonly that we start out in a specific area, but our motivations change over time. And I think something as, listening to this is, might think about, hey, which category of a learner do I fall into? And that maybe continue to be something that's fueling you to learn Chinese. And if you're having a point where it's like, why am I continuing to learn? It's always great to kind of turn back to this and think, oh, okay, this is why. Or you may be able to find a different thing that's kind of fueling your motivation to learn.
Yeah, and you might find that you have some study buddies, people that, you support each other in your studies. But if you discover that they're all career-focused learners, but you're totally an aspirational learner or something like that, then you might find that it's not actually working very well and you're not getting more encouraged while they're taking off. And so think about the people that support you and whether or not they truly support your motivation.
And on that note, there was a presentation at this National Chinese Language Conference this last week. And there was something that a teacher had said in relation to student motivation that I really liked. She said, we want our students to show up every day choosing to learn Chinese. And hopefully this might give you a framework to remember that and to choose to learn Chinese every day because that's really what we kind of need to do. It's a choice, and you can kind of white knuckle your way through, and who knows, you might be an obligated learner, but things get a lot better when you find your own motivation, you find your own purpose to learn. And I will say this, John, I have yet to meet someone who's obtained a high level of proficiency in the language without having their own motivation.
Yeah, motivation is a must. And so we hope that these 6 types will provide some insight into your own situation.
So what type of learner are you going to be in the future, John?
Motivated.
Good answer. All right, now it's time for a word from our sponsor. And today our sponsor is
Mandarin Companion Graded Readers.
All right, today we're talking about The Country of the Blind. So this is a classic tale that's based on Country of the Blind by H.G. Wells.
Yeah, and it's great because it's classic, but it's not that well known because it's a short story, not a whole novel. So you got a great author with a really cool idea, and then it's got the usual Chinese twist.
So basically there's this community of people in the far mountains of Guizhou, and they're cut off from the rest of the world for a couple centuries, and there's some sort of disease has eliminated their vision, and they no longer have any concept of sight. But this guy, he finds the group, and he thinks, oh, in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. But things don't quite turn out that way, do they?
Yeah, so this is a level 1 story, so only 300 common characters will get you through the story, and you'll be surprised at how interesting it is, even at level 1.
So go out there and get it. You can buy it on Amazon, iBooks, or Kobo, or wherever you get your books.
The Country of the Blind.
All right, now it's time for rants and raves. John, what do you have for us today? Do you have a rant or do you have a rave?
I have a rave.
All right.
And it's once again related to the Shanghai lockdown. I'm not going to bore you by talking about it too much, but it does affect what I'm thinking about. And there's this app that my kids have been using. It's a Chinese app. I'm sure there's an English version that's similar, but I don't really know. Anyway, the Chinese name is Tian Tian Tiao Sheng. So every day, jumping rope every day, whatever. And so it's one of these apps that it uses your phone's camera to like see you. It's kind of like these dancing games that you can play on Switch or whatever. But it's a phone app. My kids use it on their Xiaomi pads, and it has all these games. It's not just jump rope, because you can jump rope and it'll count. But it has all these games where like you're dodging stuff, you're collecting coins, and they're just like jumping all around. Man, when my kids first discovered this app, they couldn't go outside, right? And kids need exercise. So it got them so much great exercise, and they're still using it pretty much every day. So I think it would be cool under any circumstances, but under the lockdown, it is a lifesaver. So there's a website, you can check it out. I'm not sure how well it works in the U.S., but it's pretty cool.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I guess you can put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, it has an English website, I think, so maybe it works. All right, so Jared, rant or rave for you?
Well, I also got a rave, and it's also kind of related to something, kind of a game, too. I was just made aware of this. This was pretty funny. It's called the travelingprogrammer.com/file/Chinese character. Anyway, so I'll put a link in the show notes. But this is this little game, and it's kind of dumb, but it is kind of fun. So it's based on the HSK standards. So you got HSK 1 through 6. You click which one do you want to review, simplified, traditional, and you can do question format, English, pinyin, and tone representation. You hit play. And what it is it sets you up in almost like the old original Legend of Zelda type of looking screen. And once you get started, there's an English definition at the bottom. And in all 4 corners, there are 4 Chinese words. That might be just a character or, a couple characters for a word. And you're supposed to move your little character into the corner that represents the translation, the definition that's given to you. And but to make it a little more interesting, there's a little goblin that's chasing you around. So you've got to kind of figure it before the goblins get you. And I think as you advance, more goblins are starting to appear. So anyway, it was kind of ridiculous, but it's funny, and I thought it's a fun thing.
All right, cool. Oh, and sorry, just now what I was saying, the website is not in English, it's in Chinese, and I think it's only in China. So don't get your hopes up about Tian Tian Tiao Sheng.
Well, thanks, John. Just let me down.
Yeah. So I guess that's a rant now. Rave and then a rant.
Well, in the meantime, you can play this game from the Traveling Programmer. Dillon Jaghory is a rather modest guy considering all that he's accomplished.
My name is Dillon. I'm a lover of learning languages. I currently live in New York City. I studied international relations for my master's degree, and I studied world politics and Chinese, a double major for my undergrad at Michigan State University.
For those of us learning Chinese, only a few ever get the opportunity to travel to China or Taiwan for an immersive experience. While Dillon has had that opportunity, we never quite get to that part in his interview. His story is an excellent example of how far one can progress in their Chinese language skills while living in your home country. Stay with us. All right, Dillon, why did you start learning Chinese?
So this really all started in middle school. In middle school, I had this crazy idea. I wanted to study all the languages in the world. Not literally all the languages, but pretty darn close, right?
Yeah.
So one day I asked my mom, can you drive me to the local library? And of course, my mom was happy to take me there, but I went straight to the foreign languages section and I got a textbook on Arabic. I got a textbook on Chinese. I got a textbook on Japanese. I got a textbook on Spanish and maybe a few other languages. And I was thinking that, I can do this in a year, right? I was deluded, to say the least.
Right.
But my mom obviously wanted to encourage me, but she was also kind of telling me, hey, Dillon, maybe you should, turn it down a notch and just try and focus on one language first, right?
Well, Dillon, I want to hear, what was this? What spurred you on? You said it
Right.
seemed like it came out of nowhere, but no, it was something was brewing in you for a while. What was that?
So it seems like at the time, it really seemed like it came out of nowhere to my family, I'm sure. But for me, it was because my grandfather was, really into international affairs. He worked at the United Nations, when he was, that was a major part of his career. And I always saw photos of him, traveling to many different countries, meeting the king of Thailand, traveling to China, traveling to places in South Africa, traveling to Saudi Arabia, just so many different countries. And I was just so fascinated by that. And I thought, I want to be a very international person and I want to learn all the languages. I just want to be able to talk with everyone. So that's what sparked my interest in learning languages. But at this point, you're probably still wondering, why did Chinese stick, right?
Yeah, so what happened?
So what ended up happening was I devoted the most time to Japanese in middle school. That was in 8th grade. That's when this started, to be precise. And I got burned out from trying to learn every language within maybe a week or so. And I did actually persist in trying to learn Japanese in 8th grade. And I made a little bit of progress. I did learn some kanji, which is, Chinese characters. And, that was very challenging, but I felt very rewarded by it. When I got to high school, I went to a high school called International Academy, and it had this IB program, right? There were 3 languages that we could choose from. And a foreign language is mandatory. We had French, Spanish, and Chinese. And I looked at those 3 options and I was thinking, well, French and Spanish, they're so similar to English. And I just thought, to be quite frank, I just thought they're boring. No offense to anyone that chose French and Spanish. I am actually trying to learn French now, seriously. But at the time, I thought, these just don't look as interesting as Chinese. And I thought, I'm putting a lot of effort into learning Japanese seriously. They don't have Japanese class, but I guess Chinese is probably, is the closest I can get, because at least, I can learn the Chinese characters and that will be very helpful for learning Japanese. And that's why that's when I really started learning Chinese formally.
Wow. What was your perception then? Like after that first week, you're like, I'm going to learn every language, right? It seems like regardless of how you felt, you still kept going after Japanese.
I think what really stood out to me about Chinese was how insanely difficult it seemed. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can really, sympathize with that. The sheer number of characters, I was thinking at the time, like, if I can learn that, I'm a really smart person and I feel like I could just do anything, right? But I think that time in particular, when I started high school, the year was 2008. And that was a very interesting year to start learning Chinese because that was right around the time of the Beijing Olympics. And in my high school Chinese class, our teacher played the Beijing Olympics for us, and that left such a deep impression on me. I remembered watching, the drummers drumming perfectly in sync. Now that I'm much older, I looked at the video again, and okay, it's not as perfect as what I remembered, but I remember at the time, like, it was just so perfect, right? And I remember, watching the various like sports at the Olympics, and I remember hearing them say everything first in English and then in French and then Chinese. I remember hearing like the sound of Chinese, thinking this is such a cool language, right? It was very motivating. And I think what also really stuck with me was Beijing 欢迎你, like the music video, like Beijing welcomes you. That also left a pretty deep impression on me. I thought this just looks so cool, right? To go on a small tangent about Chinese soft power, the Beijing Olympics is kind of seen as this major victory. And based on my own personal experience, I can see why, because to me it was just so amazing and shiny and cool. And I thought, wow, I just felt so fascinated by it.
Yeah, it was a big step on the national stage. And, side note, that was actually the first time I went to China. It was there just a couple months before the Olympics.
Oh.
Not there for the Olympics, but a couple months. But yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing
Absolutely.
experience.
Yeah, 2008, that was completely different. Even though I had never been to China, like at that point in 2008, for some reason I look at the photos from China in 2008 and I feel like nostalgic. I feel like somehow like I experienced that even though I didn't. But anyways, I started in high school and I used the integrated Chinese textbook and I really enjoyed learning the language. I grew up in a very diverse city in Michigan. It's actually called Troy, Michigan. And, we had a lot of children of immigrants, including Asian Americans, immigrants from the Middle East, immigrants from East Asia, immigrants from South Asia. And that also, of course, included a lot of Chinese Americans who went to school with me. And a lot of them took the Chinese class. Some of them, they took it because they wanted to connect with their culture and language of heritage. And if you're born and raised in America, your heritage language will not be at a native level. And, they wanted to make up for a gap. As someone who speaks Farsi less than perfectly, I totally understand that. I think it was good also being in that diverse environment and having like a lot of really nice Chinese American classmates who were willing to help me, and they were able to speak much better than I was, of course.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, you started in high school taking Chinese class. What kind of prompted you to say, hey, I want to continue to study this language?
I think this must have been my junior year of high school. We actually had a exchange student from China come to our high school.
Wow, great.
I'm still friends with him on WeChat. He occasionally gives me a like every now and then. And he took me off that standard track in a way, just using the textbooks, practicing writing characters over and over again. And he took me off that track and he introduced me to a world of Chinese social media. In particular, he set me up with Renrenwang.
It was a little bit like a Facebook clone back in the day, right?
Yeah, it's ancient. I'm sure there are some people who might have no idea what Renrenwang is, but he introduced me to Renrenwang and QQ. And he told all of his friends back in China, add this guy. Just add him. And I started posting on Renrenwang in very, very broken Chinese. Right?
Wow.
That was kind of a preview of what would happen to me in college, right? I started immersing myself in actual, real, like, Chinese social media without having ever been to China, right?
Wow.
And I just remember seeing a level of depth that I could not see in the Chinese textbooks, right? Like one of the things I remember very clearly is there was a video from the Jon Stewart show that was posted onto Renrenwang and it had Chinese subtitles. And I was thinking like, wow, people in China like Jon Stewart too. I had no idea, right? And that was a moment where Chinese wasn't just like some language in a textbook. It was a real living, breathing language, right? You can try learning a language, but it really takes a while before it feels like it's real and living and breathing to you, right? And that's such an important moment. I really cannot thank him enough. His name was Andy, so if he ever listens to this, I have to give him a shout out. You're the best, Andy.
Awesome. I mean, Some people might say, all right, I'll join a Chinese social media platform, created a profile, but you never get around to posting, or you just get that wall of text, right?
Yeah.
It's just Chinese, and it's like, whoa, I have no idea what's going through. You spend 30 minutes trying to get through a paragraph or two, and then you're like, I'm done. So what was that experience like? Just grinding through that, or getting to that point to even where you could even have the possibility to come alive because you had enough comprehension?
I think in high school, my Chinese was not at a level where I could truly understand everything I read. My posts were very, very broken, and I feel like my Chinese language skills themselves didn't really benefit too much from using Renrenwang and QQ because I just wasn't at that level. If you're trying to read something in a foreign language, you should aim for like 80%. There's some theory associated with this, but like 80% is
We're a big thing on that. It's actually 98% is what you should be shooting for. But go on.
Well, I was not close to 80%, but I'd say for me, that was mostly a psychological thing. Like it psychologically motivated me. And by the end of high school, my Chinese did progress to a point where I did pass the advanced placement exam with a 5, and that kind of helped me get credits going into college.
That's fantastic.
The first year of college, I was still using Renrenwang and QQ, but I still felt like there was a certain level of distance between me and what I was seeing because I could not truly engage with all that content, right? What changed then was in my freshman year, I became very serious about studying Chinese the hard way, right? Before that, in high school, I thought, well, if I just check Renrenwang every day, if I just watch some content in Chinese, like, I'm just going to naturally pick it up. But when I got to college, I realized that's a wrong mentality. As an adult, you do not have the brain of a child anymore. You do not have that really malleable, flexible brain that can just effortlessly pick up languages to a native level. You just have to accept that reality. And in my freshman year of college, I started to realize, I really need to step up my game if I want to learn this language seriously. I also saw, the Chinese students at my university, they were freshmen like me, but their English was much, much, much better than my Chinese, right? And that was a turning point for me because I started going to the library or just going to like the studying lounge in my dorm. And I would write Chinese characters over and over again in a notebook. I used to take pride in like using up all the ink in pens or just completely exhausting, all the pages in a notebook. I used to take great pride in that. I had this idea at the time of maybe taking all the pens I used up and hanging them like on my wall.
Sticks of honor, right?
Exactly. Sticks of honor. It's kind of like a hunter, going out and killing an animal and then hanging it above his mantle, right?
The talon, right?
Above his fireplace, right? I didn't actually end up doing that, but in my freshman year, I realized that you cannot just learn Chinese entirely naturally. You really have to roll up your sleeves and just do the work.
Wow. There's always a debate about handwriting characters. We kind of have our point of view on it, but what is yours? You spent hundreds, perhaps thousands of hours writing characters. How would you say that it actually has benefited you, and was it something you would recommend?
I would recommend it. But I would also say don't worry too much if your ability to write characters is not perfect, because I'll be very honest. I use my Chinese every day. I'm talking to my Chinese friends all the time. I'm hanging out with them, and I'm using Chinese for my job very often too. And despite that, I cannot remember the last time I had to handwrite characters. So
learning to handwrite characters, it's a skill in and of itself. And learning to handwrite fluently, it takes immense practice. Nowadays, the only time I really have to handwrite something is on maybe a government form if I'm in China, or just to impress some friends, right? Hey, look at this, right? But that's about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would doodle in my notebooks in class and, just some Chinese memes and just show them to my Chinese classmates, and we'd giggle about it. That was kind of useful, right? But aside from that, if I had to write an essay with my hands without typing, I don't want to imagine what the results would be like. If I had to take the HSK, if I had to do it handwritten, I do not want to imagine what the score would be.
Thank goodness for typing. Usually we recommend, learning to handwrite is fun. It's kind of cool, but spend most of the time on learning to type because, it takes a lot of time otherwise. Right. So, you're spending a lot of time here, this turning point in this first semester in college for you. So what kind of happened next for you?
That was very important for me because I fortified my knowledge of Chinese characters. It made it much easier for me to read, but I was still not fluent. And it frustrated me because I could feel that. In my second year of college, I was able to do this very interesting summer job. It was called the American Semester Program at my university, ASP. And basically, we had students from other countries, mainly Italy and China and Australia, come to our university for one summer. And the school needed students to work as basically tour guides for this program. But basically, we set up all kinds of cultural activities for them. We took them on trips around Michigan and also out to Chicago in Canada, right? And we introduced American culture to them. I was mostly in charge of working with the Chinese students, naturally, because of my background. And it was the first time where I felt really, truly immersed in Chinese. Even though they were here to learn about American culture, I was on the bus with them as we were driving out to Chicago. And I was in their WeChat group, just collecting all their stickers and memes. And I was able to really immerse myself in Chinese. And at this point, I'd never been to China, right? So this really helped me when I made my next big breakthrough. So it's December 2014, and I was feeling very frustrated because I had worked so hard to learn Chinese. I was so devoted to it. And yet, despite that, I'd never been to China. A little bit frustrating for me, right? I thought to myself, I need to find a way to bring that environment to my doorstep. If I can't go to that environment, I need to bring it to me somehow, even though I can't go there.
This is actually really good, Dillon, because, most people do not have the luxury of going to China to study Chinese. And
exactly.
Especially now with the pandemic, it's not practical. You can't even get a visa a lot for most people.
Exactly. It's also a big financial burden. For me, that was a major concern.
Yep. It's not cheap.
So I was hanging out with a lot of Chinese friends, and they were part of various student organizations on campus. What was very interesting about these organizations was that unlike, for example, French club or Japanese club or Spanish club, the people in these organizations, the students were all Chinese. They were making content primarily in Chinese. The language they advertised in was Chinese. They put up posters in Chinese, and there were some events that they did, for example, Chinese New Year, and that was open to the public. But most of their events were for the Chinese students completely in Chinese. So I saw that they were accepting applicants to join, and I submitted an application.
Wow.
I submitted an application. I said, life is short. I can't go to China, but I want to learn Chinese. So I'm going to give this a try. They were doing interviews for the student organization. And it was quite intimidating, to be honest. Before you walk into the room, you're waiting outside with some other nervous applicants. And you walk inside. It feels like a job interview. You have 3 people sitting across from you at a table. And I just remember the expression on their faces was they were very welcoming towards me. They were happy to talk to me, but I could also see that there was maybe just a little bit of doubt because they were concerned.
A little skeptics.
They were asking me, are you sure that you will be able to communicate with us? And I told them, yeah, I am constantly, talking to my Chinese friends. I am constantly posting on WeChat. I think I can be a very useful asset in your advertising department. I've put in a lot of time and devotion. I've had a lot of exposure to Chinese social media. And I actually had my experiences on Renrenwang and WeChat, 朋友圈 to show for it. So they made the choice of letting me in. That was a very transformative experience, being part of that student organization.
So you have to go through an interview to be part of the organization, right?
Exactly.
So it's selective to be in this club, if you will. And furthermore, you're like, hey, I can actually fill a role in the leadership, I'm guessing, right?
It was selective, and they were not allowing everyone in. Of course, everyone who was applying was Chinese, and then I was applying as a foreigner. who did not speak Chinese as my native language. So there was an extra hurdle to overcome there. I just wanted to be a part of an organization, and I just wanted to immerse myself and genuinely contribute to organization as well, to actually be a part of that. I went to like the meetings with all the members, and I'd walk into like this big classroom with like close to 100 students who were all Chinese. There was a lot of pressure, right? And I felt very intimidated at first. But over time, my Chinese language skills just 突飞猛进, just it really progressed by leaps and bounds, right? And over time, they started accepting me by, letting me come eat hot pot with them or just going to see a movie with them. And I really have to say that was better than any immersion program.
Why is that?
If you go in a study abroad program, you're going to be going to classes with a Chinese teacher who's used to teaching, foreigners learning Chinese, and all of your classmates are also foreigners. It's kind of easy to have like a circle of friends that's mostly foreigners, right? And it's kind of easy to stay in that comfort zone sometimes, right?
This is common. There's usually like a dorm for all the international students.
Exactly.
And, there are some people that they kind of end up hanging out with their foreign friends. And there are some people that, hey, I'm going to get out on the street and talk to people every day, right?
Exactly.
But it sounds like you had kind of like built-in group, a social group, if you will,
right,
where you were constantly not just opportunity, but almost like to be part of the group, you needed to use Chinese.
Right. It was really kind of sink or swim. I felt pressure because I went through an interview process and I told them I can do this. I want to show them that I can do it. And there is no teacher guiding me, holding my hand. I really became motivated to learn how to write good content for Chinese social media. So I started going on to more niche Chinese social media platforms like Baidu Tieba. I guess you could say is kind of comparable to Reddit. I don't know if it's comparable in terms of popularity, but at least the way that the site works.
The format, huh?
There's a forum on Baidu Tieba called 播音主持吧. So 播音主持, that means like broadcasting, right? In China, you have a lot of people who are training to become professional broadcasters. And, it's really a big deal having like 标准普通话, like having very standard Mandarin, right? So I waltzed in there. I did not tell anyone that I was a foreigner. I just recorded samples of my voice and I just put it out there without disclosing the fact that I was not Chinese.
I'm curious, what was the reaction? I got to hear this.
So they never gave me a perfect rating, of course. They told me, oh, your Mandarin is on the less standard side. One thing that really inspired me was there's this one guy who said, like, I'm not sure that you're a foreigner, but you still need to do some work before you can become a professional broadcaster. So that's still a huge victory. That's still a huge victory.
Yeah, that
right?
is. He's conceding the point that you could become a professional broadcaster. Just need some more work, right? I see. You don't want to be good for a foreigner, right?
Exactly,
You
right.
You want to be good on your own merits.
Exactly. And in some ways, this is almost an impossible standard because you are not a native speaker. I'm not a native speaker. It does feel like an almost impossible standard, but by striving for that standard, that really helped me make progress.
That's kind of like shooting for like Mark Roswell, Da Shan.
Yeah,
I'm sure you probably know who he is, right? He was one of the first foreigners who really was it Xiangsheng. I always say that wrong. What is it?
相声.
He was one of the first foreigners who used Xiangsheng, and he just sounds like a Chinese person, like a native.
Interestingly enough, I actually reached out to him with an email. I thought it's not going to go anywhere. There's a 成语 that's like 石沉大海. It just, you throw a stone out into the sea and it sinks to the bottom. I thought my email would just be like that. He replied to me within like a day, and he gave me 4 or 5 paragraphs of heartfelt advice, answering my question directly.
He's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, it was amazing. I still have that email, right? It was such an inspiring moment. He wasn't able to go to China until he was like 26, I believe. Normally they say that if you're past that critical period, you cannot learn to a near native level. It's very difficult. But he was able to do it. So if there's anyone thinking like, well, I can't go to China and I'm old now, so I can't learn Chinese, don't think that at all. I think Da Shan's story is definitely a testament that that's not
The
true.
guy's legendary. You should check him out. It's Da Shan, which is like Big Mountain. And
Exactly.
Check him out. So he was most popular, I believe, down maybe like late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. it just kind of feels like, to be honest, a little bit unfair, because I feel like there are a lot of, Chinese people who learn English like very, very well to a near native level, but, they don't really get recognized for that. But if a non-native speaker of Chinese learns Chinese to a near native level, or even less than that, just to an intermediate level, they get a lot of recognition for that. So for me personally, my stance on that is, it feels a little bit unfair. Anyways, I was making content on social media for a Chinese organization at my campus, and I wanted to learn all the memes. I wanted to be the meme master in Chinese. So I was going on to Baidu Tieba. I was copying and pasting good memes from Baidu Tieba. I'm not encouraging plagiarism.
It's reposting. You may not realize this, Dylan, because I didn't tell you this, but I'm kind of a meme man myself. I make memes about learning Chinese. They're not in Chinese, but they're about learning Chinese. They have Chinese sometimes, but yeah.
I'm still really into learning Chinese memes, but the ones that are really burned into my head, the ones that, I learned in 2015, 2016, those ones are truly ingrained into my consciousness. So, for example, like 难受想哭, but it was somebody made a video and they mispronounced it as like 难受想哭, and it became a meme. It was kind of funny.
Crazy how these things start, yeah. And there are always new things all the time, right? To keep up on all that, you got to be pretty active.
I remember another one that was really popular back at the time was like 天线宝宝, like Teletubbies. Teletubby memes were very hot back in 2015. In 2016, there was also Ge You Tang. Ge You is like a famous actor, and there was like that meme of him like lying back in the chair and not wanting to do anything, right? And that became a meme that represented laziness. So looking back now, are there things I would have done differently? Maybe. I think for one thing, going really far back in high school, I would have focused more on getting the tones perfect. Because I feel like when you're first starting, that's when it's most important to kind of be a perfectionist when it comes to tones. Because afterwards, it's kind of hard to go back and correct it.
Yeah.
I guess another thing is also, I did immerse myself in Chinese by joining that student organization, right? But sometimes you have to learn the dry, boring grammatical rules if you want to learn a language very well. Learning through immersion, I guess maybe a downside to that is sometimes you might miss out on the finer points of grammar.
At the end of the day, you got to put the work in. There's a lot of ways to learn a language, and some are more effective than others, but they can all work.
Yeah.
Even if you have a bad method, but you're still sticking to it, you can still learn, right?
Right.
But there's definitely optimal, more effective things. And that's what I'm hearing from you, Dylan. You immersed yourself. You did the best under your circumstances. Should you study grammar or not? Well, you did, and it's helped you. Well, Dylan, what advice would you give to someone who is starting to learn Chinese right now?
Be a perfectionist when it comes to tones in the beginning. Because if you don't learn the tones properly, it's very hard to go back and correct that. Especially like 二声 and 三声, like getting those mixed up, that can really trip you up. And if you ever want to go back and like correct that, it's just hard. Another example is also like the neutral tone. It's very easy to just ignore that and just, try and remember like which tone is associated with each character. And then whenever you encounter a word, like you just, you use the correct tones, but then you don't take into account the fact that some words have like neutral tones, right? So I would say really be a perfectionist when it comes to intonation in the beginning. That's my advice. You will be thankful for that later in your journey.
I totally agree with that. Well, Dylan, this has been really insightful, and I really appreciate you sharing the story because I think that's inspiring to a lot of people to say, hey, look, you can do this. You don't have to go to China. It's great, but you don't have to.
Exactly. In the beginning, you might not feel like there are a lot of rewards for working hard to learn a language, but when you make those major breakthroughs, it really begins to snowball, right? So in 2014, I made the decision to join that student organization. I was asked to be the host of our university's 春晚. They call it like 主持人, right? So like later I was invited to be a part of the university's 非诚勿扰. That's like a very popular dating show in China. That was our university's own version of that, right? And I was also asked to be host of 春晚, like the Spring Festival Gala at our university again. And then later I was able to meet the Chinese consul general to the U.S. at the time, Hong Lei, who was actually like the spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Wow.
And then I also met the U.S. ambassador to China in 2018, Terry Branstad, I believe that was his name. Yeah, so like I had the opportunity to meet him.
Wow, that's amazing. Looks like that subreddit, Baidu Tiebai, paid off a little bit.
It did, yeah. So really, it just snowballs if you really stick to it and if you really persist. There's this one meme where you have instructions on how to draw an owl, right? And it's like the first step is you draw a circle. The second step is like you draw like rough outline of an owl. And then like step 3 is like you draw the whole owl, right?
Draw the owl, yeah, and it's ridiculously good. Yeah.
So I think what it all comes down to is don't be afraid to walk off the standard path, right? Dive into Baidu Tieba or Renren Wang, QQ, WeChat, Weixin 朋友圈. Obviously, you shouldn't do that only to learn the language, but do that just genuinely. You'll be impressed at the results.
Words of wisdom from a man who not only knows, but has walked the path. Well, Dillon, I really appreciate you sharing this story with us. It's been really insightful and inspiring.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very glad to share my experiences. I really had a very wonderful trip down memory lane just talking about all this.
That happens from time to time on this show. You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. Help us spread the word by sharing this with your friends, classmates, teachers, cousins, butcher, trainer, runner, hiker, planter, librarian, musician, and that one guy named Richard. You can subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And please write us a review so we know how we're doing. You can find us on Facebook and at MandarinCompanion.com or tag us on social media, #MandarinCompanion. Apologies to John Cena, just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is Kaiser Guo at SupChina, and our interview editor is Dominic Edgley. And I'd like to thank our guest interview, Dillon Jaghory, and of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.